De Grote Tech Show wordt mede mogelijk gemaakt door Orange Cyberdefense. Van strategie tot uitvoer, jouw cybersecurity in vertrouwde handen.
Goed dat je luistert naar de Grote Tech Show. Tech verandert onze wereld. Hier hoor je hoe. Vandaag in gesprek met de oprichter van Bellingcat. Het onderzoekscollectief dat open source intelligence groot maakte en dat nog steeds doet. En daarover willen we alles weten. En wij zijn in mijn geval Joe van Burik.
En Ben van den Burg.
En elke donderdag bespreken wij, Ben, wat er verder speelt in de wereld van tech. Nemen we de week door en hoor je wat je verder allemaal moet weten.
Belangrijk, hè?
Heel belangrijk.
Dat is heel interessant.
Zeker, want dan gaat het over van alles en nog wat. Dus volg de Grote Tech Show in je favoriete podcast-app. Maar nu gaan we naar Bellingcat. Dat kunnen we gerust het bekendste internationale onderzoekscollectief noemen in de huidige online mediawereld. Ze werden groot en zijn dat nog steeds met open source intelligence, OSINT. En daarmee halen ze zeer geregeld belangrijke ontwikkelingen boven tafel. Bij uitstek in geopolitieke conflicten. Hoe doen ze dat? En in hoeverre bedreigt de enorme opkomst van AI hun werkwijze? Of helpt het juist? And because he's from the UK, we'll be switching to English now. As we say, welcome to Bellingcat founder Eliot Higgins.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for being with us. You've made a name for yourself over the past 15 years, initially working as an open source intelligence investigator and fact checker yourself, having founded Bellingcat in 2014. So if we fly across, you've covered Syria, MH17, the assassination of Skripal, the Russian invasion in Ukraine, most recently the war in Iran. What's been the most pressing chapter?
I think going back to MH17, it was such a big moment, I think, for the whole open source community, not just Bellingcat, that it took open source investigation for something that really then was kind of still a bit of a weird hobby of oddballs on the internet to something that was increasingly recognized by journalism, but also as its value towards legal accountability. And that, I think, really was the catalyst for the increasing widespread adoption of open source investigation by journalism organizations, civil society actors, and human rights groups.
Yeah, but it's interesting because when you started, it was still probably not recognized at all by legacy media. That's the way we should talk about newspapers, radio, TV, etc. But for instance, looking back at Ukraine, I was already involved at Business News Radio, and OSINT was very much taken seriously at that point in time. Would you say it's taken seriously enough that everyone's adopting it, or are we still getting to grips with the power of OSINT?
I think after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the official invasion in 2022, that there was certainly a lot more of open source investigation techniques being used by various organizations. It was definitely established then. Part of that was because we had spent the last few years training thousands of journalists and civil society actors to do open source investigation.
Yeah, through the way you've been doing it.
Yeah, because that's always been the intent of Bellingcat. You know, when I launched it, I didn't have many big ideas, but one of them was to spread the use of open source investigation by creating case studies and leading by example, really. And over the years, we've turned that into training, collaboration, and other ways of spreading that information to both the kind of legacy media, but new media organizations and different kinds of groups that are emerging in this internet era.
So is it more the technique of how you use the open source intelligence, or is it more the legal stuff? What is most pressing? What is the most important thing you need to have?
It's really, I think really what's pressing at the moment is understanding the shift in audiences, because we're no longer in an environment where, you know, you can find audiences in one place. Like in the kind of Twitter era, that was a really big part of our audience because you had the journalists there, the experts, the public, but that's become increasingly splintered. So what's actually quite pressing at the moment is even being able to find audiences who are interested in your stuff. And for us, that's really then being led by looking at partnerships with other organizations who have those audiences already. And that can look like a few different things. So we were doing investigation into ICE raids in California, and there we worked with a local news organization called Cal Matters. So we were doing the kind of open source analysis and collection, but they were on the ground able to follow up what we were identifying. And they already had a local audience who were interested in that. In another situation recently, we published an investigation into the Kinahan drug cartel, which we did with the Irish Times in Ireland. But we also worked with a YouTube channel called Search Party. And they produced videos that are kind of 10, 15 minutes long, nice production values, to an audience who wants stuff on crime, sports, and drugs. And there they got already about 2 million views on that video. And I've had people come to me saying, I discovered your work through that video. So that we aren't paying them to do that. They're getting the content from it. They're getting a way to bring the audience a new way of reporting. But that's one of the big challenges that I think a lot of organizations are facing at the moment. How do you operate in a splintered environment?
Yeah, so you've become a bit of an intelligence supplier to all kinds of news outlets, if I may, and also training them to do the work themselves in the long run. But if we talk about your organization, as you mentioned, Bellingcat is registered as a Dutch entity. You're funded by a variety of charities, including the Dutch National Lottery, in fact. Now, Dutch media outlet Follow the Money reported you had 10 million euros in revenue in 2024. Does that cover everything you need to do and want to do?
Well, I mean, it's a challenge at the moment. The one thing that's really had a big impact on our sector is the USAID funding cuts.
Right.
Because by some estimates, that could be 25 to 40% of the global funding for non-profit journalism. And that's had a huge impact in the global south already, where there's a lot of organizations that really relied on getting that money directly. But then you have a second order effect that now in that whole funding ecosystem, there's less money. So it's become really, really competitive. And you have to think of different ways of raising money, because we did have that one good year, but we're also now having a bad year because of those funding cuts and the pressure on funders. So we're launching a kind of membership program, not to close off content on the site, but just so there's a supporters program so people who want good journalism like Bellingcat produces have a way to fund us. So it's being diverse is something, both in terms of audience and how you fundraise, is something that's really essential, I think, for our kind of organization.
Yes, but I would like to understand, because you have 40 people on your pay list. Now, and then I think, okay, 40 people, so I multiplied by 100,000 euros to make it easy. That's 4 million in costs. You have extra costs, the housing and everything, and some technique. But it's not, I mean, with 10 million, I think you are done. Or where do you use the money for?
Well, any money we budget each year a certain amount.
Yeah.
We're very careful about our money. Any money we make in excess, we kind of put away for a rainy day, because we've been sued in the past. There's funding issues.
Legal stuff also, of course.
Yeah, so we always have to have a protection against all these things that could turn up. I mean, if you look at what's happening in the US at the moment, I mean, we're already being targeted in the US by people at the State Department, and you've seen plenty of organizations who now have these court cases that are unfair and won't succeed, but it still costs you a huge sum of money to fight those. I mean, myself, I was sued by Yevgeny Prigozhin, the head of Wagner, because I shared some links on Twitter that were about Wagner and his connections to them, not even Bellingcat stories. And he could sue me in the UK, despite that case really having no chance of winning. But had that case have been gone through the entire process, it probably would have cost us, at least $1 million to fight.
Sure.
So you always have to have that money in the background, because there are people who are going to go after you.
Yeah, so that's still the legal protection, if you will. What about your personal and physical protection? Where do you stay? In the UK, in the Netherlands? Is that the only places you're going these days?
I try to limit my travel to certain countries. Like, we know Austria's got a bad security situation.
Right.
There's always been kind of risks associated with this work, even very early on. Probably after we published our pieces on MH17 is when Russia really started to react to what we were doing. It was very much, who are these amateurs? They don't know what they're talking about. But that became something that was harder and harder to kind of sustain, I think, in their narratives. And then it shifted to, Bellingcat's working for, British intelligence, American intelligence, whoever they had on their mind at the time.
Yeah.
But then there was also cyber attacks on our systems. We were targeted by the same phishing campaign that targeted the Podesta email leak, for example. We were part of that group. It was, I think, 1,000 people targeted. And then later a Proton Mail one that was more targeted. We've had people hack our websites before, which was restored easily, fortunately. We had a case where there were 6 Bulgarians working as spies on behalf of someone working on behalf of the Russian government, and they were jailed, I think, last year for that spying. So there's legitimate threats against us, but it's really about balancing. We have a security officer. We're very, very aware of those threats. I think within the kind of investigative journalism community, there's a lot of communication about what those threats can look like and, how you respond to those. Organizations like the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, the OCCRP, also, they train other journalists how to, look after themselves at events. So I think because we're quite a tight-knit community, I would say, as well, which is nice. So we kind of look after each other to an extent.
Yeah, because you've got 40 people working across the world. I'm assuming working full-time plus. In addition, 27,000 people connected to you through a Discord server.
It's actually 42,000.
42,000. Numbers keep going up. So, two questions about how do you make that all work? And also, why do you, I would say, overly rely on Discord, maybe, given it's a commercial communication platform, an American company, maybe even seeking an IPO in the near future?
Well, yeah, this is one of the challenges we have. I mean,
you could set up a forum like in the old days.
Yeah, well, this is something we've been discussing. Can we move people off Discord? But then you're adding like another barrier for entry for people to get involved. But on the other side of that as well, it feels like every company now in America is being turned to some evil cause or something like that. It's being brought by Peter Thiel or something like that. So it's like the same with our use of Slack as well. We're thinking, should we move off Slack?
Yeah.
We use like Google products, and they're like, for our storage, we've made sure that storage is in the European Union and not physically placed in the US.
Sure, you've not switched to Nextcloud just yet, we should say.
Not yet, but I mean, it's something we have serious discussions about. But in terms of the Discord community, what I really like about that community is we moderate it very, very carefully. It's not a place for arguments and speculation. So if that starts emerging and it does around certain topics, we nip that in the bud very quickly. So we kind of instill the values that what we're looking for is a discussion and examination of evidence. And then you can have your opinions on that on X or wherever you want to go and express those opinions. But it also gives people a space to come to. And the whole thing with Bellingcat is because we've always kind of shown our work in done guides and case studies, people pick up stuff from us. There might be someone who's really interested in marine traffic and they know everything about marine traffic. And they may work with someone else who's kind of got another interest that overlaps and in a particular context is really useful for an investigation. And that has happened in the past. And we draw them into our kind of editorial process. And we always make sure they've got bylines and they get the correct credit. So it creates a space where people can come together and investigate things they're interested in rather than, what Bellingcat thinks is interesting.
Right. Yeah, for me it's really interesting because with Discord of using Google, so when the entrance of barrier that you transform them from Discord to another platform. So when you're gonna switch, because there are a lot of influencers they are dependent on, for example, Instagram. But yeah, it's Instagram, and they can do what they want with you
because the network effect is too big.
And it's the same with Discord. So when are you going? When you are going to change? What are the criteria for that?
Well, this is the difficult thing. I think when you're moving people from one platform to another, you need a kind of moment to make that happen. Yeah. If you just say, "Hi guys, the platform's over here now," you won't get people moving over. If it's like in an environment where people want to engage with something, then that gives you an opportunity for people to say, "Okay, we're going to this new platform now." But you also need them to have a reason to go to those platforms. One of the reasons we were discussing Discord was because there was this requirement they were floating for people to use identification documents, and a lot of people on our server are uncomfortable with that because obviously there's a lot of sensitive stuff going on there, even for certain state actors especially. So we were kind of discussing then, is this the moment to do that? And they didn't quite implement it. And it's complex as well because you don't want to lose 42,000 people. Yeah. If 100 people move over, then you've got a problem. And it's not just having a big number. It's just that community's already there. They're communicating with each other. They know each other. So it makes it very difficult indeed. But I think there's more and more pressure. I mean, 2 years ago is a very different situation.
Of course.
Yeah. Yes. Now, we don't know what this data could be used for. What requests could be put in by the state Department of Justice about like, are our Slack conversations going to be part of a court case? Certainly.
But I do feel your pain. I mean, you're a gamer, I'm a gamer. Discord's known to be a gamer's communication platform, most notably. At the same time, you've also gone on record as saying that your affinity for this started out on message boards and forums, meeting people who define online culture, if you will. I know all about it. But if you look that back into OSINT, you could also consider the whole thing you're doing to be the most serious game in the world you can play with like-minded friends.
Yeah,
is that a fair thing to say?
I've had that described to me before. Yeah.
Well, please elaborate. How does that go for you?
Well, I mean, I kind of get that. I mean, I've been playing computer games since I was a little kid, and it's probably done a lot to my brain because of that as well.
Same here. Ben's not the same.
No. But I think in it as well, when I kind of grew up in forum culture as well. The Something Awful forums were a very big part of my kind of late teens and early 20s, and that was very formative in a lot of kind of online culture.
Yeah, I completely understand.
And I did find when I was kind of doing work with kind of more serious organizations who were trying to understand issues around disinformation, their experiences were so detached from those online experiences, because unlike me, they were studying when they were at university and going to like Harvard and like really nice places like that. And I was kind of at a terrible university in the UK, failing to turn up for lessons. But I did kind of understand the online culture that would produce disinformation. They kind of saw it through this kind of very kind of logical, intellectual lens. And I said, this is kind of not what's going on in these communities. And that's why you're having so much trouble understanding this. So I think that's also, I think it's useful to have people from different backgrounds, especially in these online environments.
Yeah. At the same time, given the way you operate in an OSINT environment, you'd think people and organizations involved in conflicts and situations, in crime, would, by 2026 standards, become more discreet, hiding their crucial information. But I'm assuming that's still not the case, since you're still able to do your work.
Yeah, I mean, even, I think Russia has probably learned the most from us than any other state has to.
They're now not putting crucial telephone numbers in their passport documents anymore. Yeah, so like in the Skripal case.
Yeah, they've definitely learned their lessons, but still, I mean, there's only so much you can do to mitigate those risks even when you know what they are. But then you have plenty of places in the world where you just have states or groups or individuals who just haven't heard of Bellingcat or open source investigation and think they can get away with doing the same stuff that they've always been doing because no one's kind of brought that to their doorstep yet, that they've not been challenged in that way yet. So it's always kind of amusing for me when we do start doing work in a new area. Like we did one investigation into these killings that took place in Cameroon by these soldiers. Right. And when we first published something with the BBC, the Cameroonian government gave a press conference where they had a still from the video with the words fake news under it and denouncing us, saying it wasn't real. Mm-hmm. But then within a year, because of the pressure our reporting produced, those soldiers were convicted for those murders in a Cameroonian court.
So you were proven right.
Yeah, but they weren't, I don't think, prepared for us to kind of do that. It's like another example is, there was the shooting down of PS-752 in Iran, which is a Ukrainian aircraft. And the Ukrainian investigators who went there were the same ones who had followed our work on MH17 for years and really trusted us. So when we published a piece that showed the missile streaking through the air and shooting the aircraft down, which the Iranians wanted to say was fake, they said, no, if Bellingcat's saying it's real, then you've already lost the argument. And the Iranians admitted that they had actually shot down the thing within 24 hours of that message being communicated to them. So it does have a real impact.
Ja, we praten zo verder met onze gasten in de Grote Tech Show na deze boodschappen. En nu verder in gesprek met onze gasten.
So are there coming extra things? Because now they know it, they know how you work. So do you have extra? So that's new for everyone.
Changing the game.
It's changing the game the last year or so.
Well, I mean, there's always new developments. I mean, that's one thing that's so fun about this is there's always some new idea or tool or platform that emerges.
Including AI.
Well, there's AI, yeah. But, something that I think has really kind of improved over the last couple of years is marine traffic investigations.
Oh, yes.
There's a lot of work on shadow fleets, for example. One of the things our Discord community did is they investigated an oil spill off the coast of Trinidad and Tobago as a community, using those same techniques we'd kind of been using, like using marine traffic to track data, look for when people are turning off transponders. We could then get satellite imagery of the same area. So when those transponders went off, we could still track the ships visually. And we also, one of our team members develops a piece of machine learning software to automatically detect vessels at sea as well in satellite imagery to make those searches easier. And that's a completely new tool and set of techniques.
Yes.
But there's it opens up more doors. I just see it as lots of doors. Some are closed, some are open. Some you need to rattle the door handle out a bit. But the more, time goes on, doors do close, but lots of them open with these new tools.
Yeah, but with the oil spill, you cannot hide it because it's there. But also that someone's tried to hide something because they know how you work, and then you have a new method, and you discover it.
Yeah, this is the thing. I mean, all the way through the work, even when I started blogging, we were figuring out these techniques as we went, like geolocation. I don't know who made up the word geolocation in reference to our work, but it's because we were doing something we didn't have a word for. It's just like spot the difference with satellite imagery and video, but someone said this is geolocation, everyone said it's geolocation now. So we get to make up words, which is always nice as well.
At the same point, though, you obviously use a lot of imagery shared across the internet, including social media, to cross-reference stuff. That's part of OSINT. But we have so much AI-generated content in the mix these days that probably not just adds to the importance of your work, and we'll get to that as well, but hinders your fact-checking as well, because how can you know for sure that this image can still be used for reference?
Yeah, so
for instance,
it's always been a challenge because you've had the risk of photoshopped, misattributed imagery, so on and so forth. Yeah. So there's already techniques in place. The one thing I do worry about is I'm seeing some AIs that can handle kind of camera movements within a space and can be trained off over imagery. So if you have street view imagery, you train an AI, quite straightforward to say recreate this scene, and then you can start moving a camera about in it. Because we're looking often for that kind of street view reference imagery. That could be something that becomes a risk. But then you're still dealing with other information, like, what is there people on the ground reporting this? Is there local news in the area? So on and so forth. So there's other sources you need to check. But, with anything, you always need to double check the images you're seeing, because there's other ways to fake them, not just AI.
Yeah, but for instance, you are able to recognize certain AI-generated content to point it out as a fake. And the most notable case in the Netherlands, in fact, is a story published by The Telegraph last month about evacuation flights. I can see you laughing already, with seats selling for up to $2,000, and you pointed it out as a fake story. What's been key in spotlighting something like that?
I mean, sometimes it's just looking at an image, because we've looked at vast amounts of AI images between us. Yeah. And there's just kind of almost subconscious tells you can start seeing that makes you think there's something up about this image. Like, I think in that one, it was the view of the buildings in the background just didn't seem to be the earring. Right.
Well, was that you or your team's first impression, or did that take in-depth research?
I think you get, I wouldn't say a vibe, but you recognize AI images.
Still do.
They still have a bit of an energy about them, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And then you start looking at the details and then you start, like the earring and the clove merging into stuff. And then you look at the background imagery and you think, okay, can we find something that matches it? And then you realize there's like no building would give that kind of angle on that view. So all those little things start mounting up, and then you can say this is not a true image. Yeah. But it is getting harder and harder. And we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years how quickly that quality has changed. I remember I did a thread, I think it was 3 years ago, when I think it was Midjourney 3 came out, and I thought it would be amusing. It was at the time there were claims Donald Trump was being arrested. So I said, whilst you're making...
with the handcuffs.
Yeah. And image, I turned it into... it was really for me to test out the capabilities of Midjourney 3. And this was before everyone was freaking out about these fake images. And thanks to me, they started freaking out about the fake images. Because I did a whole storyline on Twitter of basically, it was the Shawshank Redemption, but with Donald Trump. And he kind of escaped and ran out and went to McDonald's. And it was obviously a bit. So I didn't think anything of it. And no one shared it as a genuine image. But it was so realistic, people freaked out about it. And then you had the Pope in a puffer jacket.
Yes,
coming
remember that.
A few days later.
Really important.
And I still to today get letters asking for permission to use those images in some academic book or news article about AI-generated imagery from across the world. It's like my biggest cultural contribution to stupid images.
Was AI-generated images. Yeah. At the same, we could point back before the Gen AI hype. I mean, looking at everything that's had an impact on what you're doing. I mean, you've also stated in some publications, we could point back at the Iraq war, at COVID times, at Trump's rhetoric over the past 10 years. But then there's the augmentation impact of algorithmic timelines on social media platforms. What's been the biggest factor, and how does that size up to the impact of AI?
I think it is, well, I mean, I think it's very easy to point out algorithms and say, oh, it's all algorithms that are making people go crazy and believe in conspiracy theories. But this always begins with a sense of betrayal or loss of trust in some institution for some reason. That's always at the core of this. It can be something that's genuine, it can be something that's not, and it creates a kind of demand for other information. I think when we're dealing with conspiracy theories and the far right and far left and all these issues, we treat it like it's a supply side issue. That there's bad information out there. It might be coming from a foreign actor or a conspiracy theorist, but if we can get rid of that and replace it with good information, that solves the issue. But the problem is that's not really the whole story. There's a demand for this because people feel they lose trust in institutions, and we often think of it in terms of say the conflict in Syria and the chemical weapon denialists who just say this is Iraq all over again, which is a legitimate concern. But you can also look at it like the alternative health community, where you have women who often get poor health care, their concerns are dismissed, they get this sense of humiliation and betrayal from the people who are supposed to support them. So then they find an alternative health community that exists online that offers them answers, but it also offers them a community who've gone through similar traumatic experiences.
And it resonates with them.
And it reinforces it as well. So it creates this kind of recursive loop. And the problem is then, as you're over time exposed to this and you have more of these bad experiences and you see other people's bad experiences, it opens you up to even more and more radical ideas. It kind of filters you towards the most extreme version of beliefs you can hold. So you may have started off thinking that vaccines might not be safe, but then you might end up reading stuff about Bill Gates putting microchips in vaccines and how 5G towers are going to activate them, and then you're burning them down. And to you, that's a logical journey that you've gone through. And this is the other problem we make. We treat these people as illogical actors, but within the information environment that they're in, it's logical. And because we have an algorithmically mediated environment that serves them, content that's emotionally engaging, that is designed specifically for them, that people produce that content genuinely or for monetization or for other purposes, it's a really poisonous ecosystem, and we don't create alternatives to that. We just let the internet be the internet. And the internet, in those terms, is awful.
Okay, great analysis, in my opinion. What kind of factors can we change to make it better?
Realistically.
Realistically. I mean, we do a lot of this kind of work practically. It is about saying, okay, how do we create these alternative spaces for people to go to ultimately? And what are the values of those spaces as well? Does the methodology have primacy there? Is like on our Discord server, it is about that methodology being what we build our identity around. It's not a pre-assumed conclusion about something.
Right.
So there's kind of values associated with that. I think as well, education has to be a really big part of this, not just in terms of here's how you do fact check a headline or do a source investigation, but how do we instill critical thinking skills about this information environment? We don't live in the kind of top-down, elite-controlled system that we used to live in, where the public were merely recipients of information. The public are now not only the distributors and creators of information, they're the infrastructure itself.
Right.
There's almost like a merging between the kind of social media platforms and the public itself. So we need to really think about education on those terms as well. And that's not to turn everyone into a news influencer, but educate them around, okay, this is actually what the internet does to you. And you can see the impact of that. Anecdotally, I mean, my daughter's 14 and she's very much in her generation, kind of flooded with social media. You have to have a smartphone. It's part of your social group. But my son, who's 11 years old, those kids don't get smartphones. They're not allowed so much on social media because their parents are more aware of that. So education does work with parents. They have to have that responsibility and understanding of the damage. But we also need to work through schools to build knowledge within students, also within teachers, because they're on the front lines of this. They're the ones who are seeing this information.
But would that then mostly equate to what we call media wisdom in the Netherlands? But because I've also seen a recent publication co-written by you that we should encourage everyone in society to be verifying information all the time to a certain extent.
Well, because now we are all the distributors of this information. We are the distribution industry.
But how do we get everyone in society to start to have this conscience and then at least the basic skills to be verifying all the time?
We need to explain these are core democratic values in this society. We think about democracy and how, democracy seems to be in a lot of trouble at the moment. And I think there's good reasons for that because, there is these institutional betrayals that people feel. Things like austerity, for example. And there's certainly, I think, a social contract that is based around meritocracy, that we're told that if we work hard, the government is going to create you opportunities through education, through jobs, for you that to work. But in reality, you've got people working 3 jobs just to make ends meet.
Yeah.
And that is a kind of social contract that's being kind of broken at scale. So people are now looking for alternatives. And what groups offer that are authoritarian, populist, and conspiratorial in nature is a sense of belonging, empowerment, certainty. It's kind of, there's this concept of having too much freedom that kind of emerged in the post-World War II era.
Yeah, but the solution is always education. The solution is always regulation, that we regulate big tech, and it's always that the technology will evolve and make it sometimes better and sometimes worse. But that are broad terms.
Yeah, and this is the thing. I look a lot at the kind of interwar period where, the UK and the US after World War I, they recognised there was a lot of betrayal of public trust from the government, from the media. So they improved democracy. They made it more inclusive. They spread the vote. They created public interest media in the UK with the BBC. And that created kind of democratic substrate, democratic infrastructure. But in that moment, the public couldn't own printing presses. They couldn't participate in the distribution of information. Now we live in a very different period. The public can be part of that. So we can't just start kind of think this whole model of like we have the institutions, the media, the government as being separate from the public. We are now kind of in the same system together. So we need to build around those ideas. I'm not saying that everyone should become an open source investigator. I mean, obviously people have other things to do, but we can kind of create those opportunities, that we create communities where this happens. So, we talk about the Discord server, that's an online space, but we are also working with universities to create open source investigation training material and create investigative hubs there. And the goal there is for the students to investigate things that interest them. And in the long term, connect them to local media, communities, and civil society actors to create kind of support for investigations in those communities. Yeah. And build those communities and those bonds that, for me, are so important in this era. We need those real-world bonds, those real-world communities, because the spaces that exist online for those communities are generally quite unhealthy for democracy. So we need to kind of take this as an opportunity to kind of build these spaces, build these communities. And it is possible. Doing it at scale may be a challenge. I mean, there's only one Bellingcat, you might make, 10 million a year, as he said, or whatever it may be, but, it's still, against tech billionaires who've got their thumb on the scale for all these different platforms. Yeah. How do you create alternatives to that, but also recognize that this is, these platforms are where people don't just get information, but they do e-commerce, and their lives are so intertwined with it. They keep in contact with their friends and family. We need to create alternatives to that not necessarily replace those, but at least give a healthier space for people to express those feelings, those ideas, and participate.
Yeah, but what I am hearing you say is that the solution lies in a bottom-up approach across the board and getting everyone, especially the younger generations, awareness raised and getting them, to recognize any sort of content, speak out about it. That will take time. Are you hopeful we will see an improvement in the situation across the board?
Do you see an improvement?
That's the first question.
Yeah. To an extent, but it is still being outpaced by kind of the worst side of things. It's like, the younger generation at my kids' school are less on smartphones, but there's still damage that's already being done. Yeah. I think when we talk about solutions that are like, algorithmic transparency, I think that's... okay, great. The algorithms are still there and it's still messing up people's minds. Yeah,
so ineffective.
And honestly, I don't think that many people would opt out of algorithms day to day. Now, if you're a specialist and you're doing research, sure, but if you're just somebody who wants to scroll through and see stuff you like, no.
Well, though I should add, in the Netherlands, thanks to Bits of Freedom, we now do have the choice, if you're on Instagram, to just have your following feed. And if that would have a precedent effect, and in the next couple of years, at least in Europe, for instance, you see that everywhere. We're starting to get there, I would argue.
I think that's really important. And it's kind of like, we need to understand what the actual impact of this is like. It's like people are talking about the social media ban for 16-year-olds in Australia, how that doesn't really work. But that's something that may work in 5 or 6 years' time when you get the younger kids who aren't being given smartphones straight away. Yeah. Like in the UK, some people are proposing that we have a kind of... there used to be these National Health Service glasses that kids used to get. They were cheap, but widely available. What about a kind of a national dumb phone that kids get when they're like 12 or 13?
Sure.
It's just like one of those old Nokias, give that out to everyone. Give them a little bit of credit so they don't need to have these smartphones to keep in contact with their mum and dad, because that's the excuse. It's like, I can't get in touch with my kid, which is, I managed to survive when I was young.
We all did in the day.
It's a different world. But I think, there's another proposal, but we need to do this. We tend to talk about this stuff a lot. I was at an event recently and there were various policymaker types there. And people were talking about what civil society are doing. And he says, it's really great you're doing all this, but there's just not enough of it.
No.
And there needs to be more of it. And everyone was kind of like, well, how's there going to be more of it if no one's supporting the more of it? Because at the moment, what is getting support are, tech billionaires throw money into right-wing organizations that are wrecking everything around us. Because what they want is this kind of version of the world where they're kind of tech overlords.
Yeah.
And they kind of use Curtis Yarvin, for example. Yeah. People call him like an intellectual leader. He's more of an intellectual excuse. They want to do this stuff, so they found some cod philosopher to justify the reasons for doing it. Yeah. If you look at, what they're proposing, it's a form of kind of techno-feudal capitalism, which would be a nightmare for us all to live in. Yeah. So where's the pushback against that? Where's the kind of deeper thinking about why our democracies are failing? And it's not because there's lots of disinformation and we're being tricked into believing false stuff. It's because people feel that their institutions have betrayed them, that when they look for an alternative space to find those, they only find those spaces on the internet that generally are populist and conspiratorial in nature, and then that drives these political parties. And the algorithms feed us stuff that enrage us, that engages us. And around topics like immigration, for example, those are the most salient because two sides are really angry with each other, so the internet loves it.
We have to build it from the ground up, I understand, but I also believe a little bit in leadership in our government, and our government is aware that we need to do something. Yeah. And I like your example of they started the BBC, so you really put money, you start the BBC public, and we have also a BBC like in the Netherlands, of course. Yeah. So you have to put more efforts also in that. So our government has to make a decision to put more efforts in the public to enhance the democracy. To restore the trust.
I think especially that includes local media and public interest media.
So there should be more subsidization of local media.
I really think so. I think local media plays a much, much bigger role in democratic coherence than it's given credit for. Yeah. I think we certainly noticed this in the UK as that's kind of gone away, that we would have journalists who knew their local communities, would find stories there, understood what was important. I think the other side of this is, though, which is really important, is that we can teach people that this is how democracy should work and that you can be part of this. Yeah. But if the institutions are unresponsive to that, if they ignore it or they just give us kind of empty promises, then that will drive the same cynicism that have led us to this point. Yeah. So this isn't just about what the responsibility of the public to do better on the internet. Mm-hmm. It's about the responsibility of the institutions to actually be functional institutions and not giving a kind of performance of democracy, which tends to be the state we live in at the moment.
Yeah, but you are hopeful that the wheels are turning to get there, or is there a lot more momentum now?
I would call myself a cynical optimist.
Cynical optimist?
Yeah.
Okay, but if I can close off then, I would ask you, is there any specific role, as it started out for you, for video game culture? Given we both grew up in online communities, the way we interact, we see the world, could we harness that way of storytelling and cultural energy, if you will, to also improve the world, to defeat the final bosses and restore happiness to the public?
Well, I mean, there's, certainly I would say a lot of the people I work with are from that same kind of culture. I think, very online is, a big part of it. It's probably ADHD related more than anything else.
Well, we can all sympathise, including Ben.
Yeah, I think that's a big driver for our work. But, the OCCRP, they're going to be producing games around kind of investigation. I mean, we have at Bellingcat our Bellingcat challenges pages so people can get involved. But I think there's a way to bring this to different audiences that can be exciting and engaging. And there's this kind of rise of the detective game like Obra Dinn and the Golden Idol series and stuff like that, there's take up for that kind of stuff. Yep. Looking at like the Root Trees game as well, where you're literally on the pin boards doing open source research to pin stuff together. This kind of entertainment already exists and it's a popular format as well.
Yeah. Well, we can always hope that video games are part of the solution to a better democratic world. Thank you for this conversation, Bellingcat founder Eliot Higgins. Tot zover voor nu. Luister de Grote Tech Show juist ook als podcast via de app die jij gebruikt voor je podcast. En vanaf elke donderdag hoor je daar ook de analyses van Ben en mij over wat er verder speelt in de wereld van tech. Tot de volgende Grote Tech Show. Dag.
De Grote Tech Show wordt mede mogelijk gemaakt door Orange Cyberdefense. Van strategie tot uitvoer, jouw cybersecurity in vertrouwde handen.